In this movie, we're going to look at how you show parallel flows of activity in activity diagrams. We'll look at the two kinds of control node used for parallel flows, that is, fork nodes and join nodes, how you can show parallel flows without these special nodes, and explain the token passing concept that's behind activity diagrams, and show the last of the control nodes, the flow final node. It's common in business processes for activities to take place in parallel. For example, the invoice for a product can be produced at the same time as it's being delivered. In computerized systems, flows within activities can take place in parallel by running on different servers, processes, or threads in an application. We can show these in an activity diagram with parallel flows. The workflow forks at a fork node and rejoins at a join node. These are both shown as thick bars in the diagram, perpendicular to the general flow of the activity. Here's a diagram showing a fork and a join. The fork on the left has one flow into it and multiple flows out. The join has multiple flows into it and one flow out. By default, the join is a logical AND across all the input flows. That is, they must all be enabled for it to go on to the next activity or action. It's possible to add a textual join specification that specifies the logic if it isn't the default. It's possible to show multiple flows out of and into activities and actions, and the default position is that all the flows out of an activity or action will be taken in parallel, and all the flows into an activity or action must be enabled for it to execute. It's often better to use explicit fork and join nodes so that it's clear to the reader what's happening in the diagram. Activity diagrams are based on a diagramming notation called Petri nets. This models the flow through the diagram in terms of tokens being passed from one activity or action to the next along the control flows or object flows, which we'll see in another movie. When an activity starts, a token is presented at the initial node and is offered to the first activity or action. This accepts the token and holds it while it executes its activity. When it completes, it offers tokens on its outputs, usually just one. When the next activity or action is ready to take the token, it accepts it and begins executing. The process carries on through the flow. At fork nodes, tokens are presented on each of the outbound flows and are passed through in parallel. At the join, assuming the default behavior of ANDing the flows together, the tokens must come together again, and if one token arrives before the others, it will wait until they're all ready, at which point the join will present a single token on its output. Join nodes synchronize flows. At decision nodes, the token only goes one way, and execution continues on the selected path. On merge nodes, only one incoming token is required for execution to continue at the next activity or action. At an activity final node, the whole activity is terminated. Sometimes when you use parallel flows, it's possible for a flow to come to an end without the need to rejoin it back into the main flow and without terminating the whole activity. In this case, you can use a flow final node, which brings a flow to an end but doesn't terminate the activity on other flows. It's shown as an X in a circle, as here. Let's add these fork and join nodes to a diagram in Enterprise Architect. We'll add an activity diagram, add a device, which will specify the use case. So I'll go into the use cases in the configuration package, and I'm going to add an activity diagram as a new child diagram, activity with activity diagram. I'll call it add a device. Here's the new activity diagram. I'll add the activity add a device to enclose it. And then I'll add an initial node. I click on the toolbox, click on the diagram. This doesn't need a name. Now I'll add the first three activities. I click on the toolbox, click into the diagram. The first one is called Display Device Entry Screen. Second one is called Enter Device Details and Submit. And the third is called Create New Device. I'll connect these together with control flows using the quick linker. Now, I want two things to happen in parallel. The system will asynchronously test that the device exists and will also redisplay the information about the device for the user. So I add a fork node. I select it from the toolbox and click on the diagram. It doesn't need a name. There are two versions in the toolbox, a horizontal one if the activity diagram flows down the page, and a vertical one if the activity diagram flows across the page. In EA, you can always switch between the two with this little icon here that appears when the fork or join is selected. I'll add the join node as well, and then two activities between them. Redisplay device details and test physical device. Now I can connect these up the fork and then to the join. Now I want to display the result of the test and end the activity. So I'll add another activity and I'll call it display result of test. And I connect the join node to that. And then I add an activity final node and connect my last activity to that. So in this movie, we've looked at fork and join nodes in activity diagrams, and we've added a fork node and a join node and some parallel activities into a diagram.